Sarah Emma Edmonds was born in 1841 and died in 1898, and she was one of many women during the Civil War to enlist into the fight as a man. She was born in Canada, and she was raised by a single father who she ended up running away from due to an arranged marriage she did not want to be a part of. Then, to get into the U.S., she assumed the name Frank Thompson with Company F of the 2nd Michigan Regiment of Volunteer Infantry. She fooled most of her regiment into believing that she was a man. She fought in the First Battle of Bull Run and Blackburn's Ford and worked as a mail carrier, hospital worker, and twice as a spy. She left the service in 1863. She deserted the army. But later, in a reunion in 1892 with her company, she and her fellow soldiers were able to get her military pension from Congress. She's one of the most famous examples of a woman serving during the Civil War. She was not the only. There were approximately 400 other women soldiers, but being a soldier was not the only thing that women did during the war. Many served as nurses, doctors, and even spies.
During the Civil War, some women disguised themselves as men in order to enter the U.S. Army. They would often take on jobs as mail carriers or aid the military by taking back the dead or wounded soldiers. Acting as a volunteer, nurse, and spy for the Union, Harriet Tubman helped establish a network of spies. As a former slave, she became the first woman in American history to lead a military expedition. When the Civil War came to an end, she spent the rest of her life helping former slaves and creating homes for the elderly. As a Confederate spy, Isabel Boyd was able to gather information from Union soldiers thanks to her youthful appearance and flirtatious abilities. In the memoirs that she kept, she would often mention the different methods she used as a spy. For example, eavesdropping and sewing messages in fabric. She continued to write memoirs after the war and married several times.
Dr. Mary Walker. When the Civil War began in 1861, Walker wanted to join the Union's efforts, but was discriminated against due to her gender, and was only allowed to practice as a nurse. However, in 1863, her request to practice as a surgeon was finally accepted. She became the first female U.S. Army surgeon. She would often go across enemy lines for wounded soldiers, was the first woman to be treated on an equal basis as a prisoner of war, and was awarded a Medal of Honor by Congress. Sally Louisa Tompkins. She was a Confederate nurse who many believe was the first woman to be formally inducted in the Army in U.S. history, and the only woman commissioned by the Confederate Army. And it is said, she only lost 73 of her 1,333 patients. After the Civil War, Tompkins was then able to run her hospital with the cooperation of the military until her fortune ran out, and she went to live in the Confederate Women's Home for the remainder of her life.
Many materials necessary for war were reserved for the soldiers. For example, having to use okra for coffee instead of beans, using berries and roots for medicine, and ground peas for gasoline instead of kerosene. Many now found themselves spinning cloth for tents and bandages rather than just for clothing. They even had to find substitutes for leather for shoemaking. On both sides of the war, women worked in factories to create war materials, namely the uniforms. In the North, women worked together with men from northern societies to form the U.S. Sanitary Commission. They raised money for medical supplies, trained nurses, and held bazaars and fairs to raise money to help the widows, disabled soldiers, and orphans left behind from the war. Early funding was provided through private contributions, but it was later affiliated with the federal government. The greatest contribution of the Sanitary Commission was to reduce the fatalities resulting from the diseases of war. Also on the home front, but like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, championed for equal rights for different minority groups.
During the 1800s, it can be argued that the women's suffrage movement was at its peak of activism, with members like Susan B. Anthony spearheading equality in many forms. If anything is proof that women are equal to men, it is their impact on the Civil War. Many more lives would have been lost if not due to their efforts as nurses, spies, and doctors and soldiers. Without their help, the Civil War, the bloodiest war to ever happen on American soil, would have been much, much bloodier.